First Book of Samuel chapter 1. Verse 1, Now there was a certain man of Ramah Zophim, of Mount Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Abihu, the son of Toah, the son of Zuph, and Ephrathah. Verse 2, And he had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Verse 3, And this man went up out of his city early to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. Verse 4, And when the time was that Elkanah offered, he gave to Peninnah his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters, portions. Verse 5, But unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. Verse 6, And her adversary also provoked her sore, for to make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. Verse 7, And as he did so year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her. Therefore she wept, and did not eat. Verse 8, Then said Elkanah her husband to her, Hannah, why weepest thou? And why eatest thou not? And why is thy heart grieved? Am not I better to thee than 10 sons? Verse 9, So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord. Verse 10, And she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. Verse 11, And she vowed a vow, and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine hand, and remember me, and not forget thine hand, but wilt give unto thine hand a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. Verse 12, And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. Verse 13, Now Hannah, she spake in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. Verse 14, And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. Verse 15, And Hannah answered and said, No, my Lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Verse 16, Count not thine hand for a daughter of Belial, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief have I spoken hitherto. Verse 17, Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. Verse 18, And she said, Let thine hand find grace in thy sight. So the woman went her way, and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. Verse 19, And they rose up in the morning early, and worshipped before the Lord, and returned, and came to their house to Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. Verse 20, Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked him of the Lord. Verse 21, And the man Elkanah, and all his house, went up to offer unto the Lord the yearly sacrifice, and his vow. Verse 22, But Hannah went not up, for she said unto her husband, I will not go up until the child be weaned, and then I will bring him, that he may appear before the Lord, and there abide forever. Verse 23, And Elkanah her husband said unto her, Do what seemeth thee good, tarry until thou have weaned him, only the Lord establish his word. So the woman abode, and gave her son suck until she weaned him. Verse 24, And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, with 3 bullocks, and 1 ephah of flour, and a bottle of wine, and brought him unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh, and the child was young. Verse 25, And they slew a bullock, and brought the child to Eli. Verse 26, And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by thee here, praying unto the Lord. Verse 27, For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition which I asked of him. Verse 28, Therefore also I have lent him to the Lord, as long as he liveth he shall be lent to the Lord. And he worshipped the Lord there. First Book of Samuel chapter 2. Verse 1, And Hannah prayed, and said, My heart rejoiced in the Lord, mine horn is exalted in the Lord, my mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. Verse 2, There is none holy as the Lord, for there is none beside thee, neither is there any rock like our God. Verse 3, Talk no more so exceeding proudly, let not arrogancy come out of your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. Verse 4, The bows of the mighty men are broken, and they that stumbled are girded with strength. Verse 5, They that were full have hired out themselves for bread, and they that were hungry ceased, so that the barren hath borne 7, and she that hath many children is waxed feeble. Verse 6, The Lord killeth, and maketh alive, he bringeth down to the grave, and bringeth up. Verse 7, The Lord maketh poor, and maketh rich, he bringeth low, and lifteth up. Verse 8, He raiseth up the poor out of the dust, and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill, to set them among princes, and to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he hath set the world upon them. Verse 9, He will keep the feet of his saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness, for by strength shall no man prevail. Verse 10, The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Out of heaven shall he thunder upon them. The Lord shall judge the ends of the earth, and he shall give strength unto his king, and exalt the horn of his anointed. Verse 11, And Elkanah went to Ramah to his house, and the child did minister unto the Lord before Eli the priest. Verse 12, Now the sons of Eli were sons of Bilhah, they knew not the Lord. Verse 13, And the priest's custom with the people was, that, when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came, while the flesh was unseething, with a flesh stalk of 3 teeth in his hand. Verse 14, And he struck it into the pan, or kettle, or cauldron, or pot, all that the flesh stalk brought up the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither. Verse 15, Also before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came, and said to the man that sacrificed, Give flesh to roast for the priest, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. Verse 16, And if any man said unto him, Let thee not fail to burn the fat presently, and then take as much as thy soul desireth, then he would answer him, Nay, but thou shalt give it me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Verse 17, Wherefore the sin of the young man was very great before the Lord, for many bore the offering of the Lord. Verse 18, But Samuel ministered before the Lord, being a child, girded with a linen feb. Verse 19, Moreover his mother made him a little coat, and brought it to him from year to year, when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. Verse 20, And Eli blessed Elkanah and his wife, and said, The Lord give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord. And they went unto their own home. Verse 21, And the Lord visited Hannah, so that she conceived, and bare 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord. Verse 22, Now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. Verse 23, And he said unto them, Why do ye such things? For I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. Verse 24, Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear, ye make the Lord's people to transgress. Verse 25, If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord, who shall entreat for him? Notwithstanding they hearkened unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them. Verse 26, And the child Samuel grew on, and was in favor both with the Lord, and also with men. Verse 27, And there came a man of God unto Eli, and said unto him, Thus said the Lord, Did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father, when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? Verse 28, And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon mine altar, to burn incense, to wear and fret before me? And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Verse 29, Wherefore keep ye at my sacrifice and at mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honors thy sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel my people. Verse 30, Wherefore the Lord God of Israel said, I said indeed that thy house, and the house of thy father, should walk before me forever. But now the Lord said, Be it far from me. For them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Verse 31, Behold, the days come, that I will cut off thine arm, and the arm of thy father's house, that there shall not be an old man in thine house. Verse 32, And thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation, in all the wealth which God shall give Israel, and there shall not be an old man in thine house forever. Verse 33, And the man of thine, whom I shall not cut off from mine altar, shall be to consume thine eyes, and to grieve thine heart, and all the increase of thine house shall die in the flower of their age. Verse 34, And this shall be a sign unto thee, that shall come upon thy two sons, on Hophni and Phinehas. In one day they shall die both of them. Verse 35, And I will raise me up a faithful priest, that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and in my mind. And I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever. Verse 36, And it shall come to pass, that every one that is left in thine house shall come and crouch to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and shall say, Put me, I pray thee, into one of the priest's offices, that I may eat a piece of bread. First Book of Samuel chapter 3. Verse 1, And the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli. And the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. Verse 2, And it came to pass at that time, when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that he could not see. Verse 3, And ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep. Verse 4, That the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here am I. Verse 5, And he ran unto Eli, and said, Here am I, for thou callest me. And he said, I called not, lie down again. And he went and lay down. Verse 6, And the Lord called yet again, Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli, and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And he answered, I called not, my son, lie down again. Verse 7, Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. Verse 8, And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli, and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Verse 9, Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, Go, lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Verse 10, And the Lord came, and stood, and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth. Verse 11, And the Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel, at which both the ears of every one that heareth it shall tingle. Verse 12, In the day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. Verse 13, For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. Verse 14, And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli, that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever. Verse 15, And Samuel lay until the morning, and opened the doors of the house of the Lord. And Samuel feared to shew Eli the vision. Verse 16, Then Eli called Samuel, and said, Samuel, my son. And he answered, Here am I. Verse 17, And he said, What is the thing that the Lord hath said unto thee? I pray thee hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me of all the things that he said unto thee. Verse 18, And Samuel told him every whit, and hid nothing from him. And he said, It is the Lord, let him do what seemed them good. Verse 19, and Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did make none of his words fall to the ground. Verse 20, and all Israel from Dan even to Beersheba knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. Verse 21, and the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. First book of Samuel chapter 4. Verse 1, and the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out against the Philistines to battle, and pitched beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines pitched in Ek. Verse 2, and the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel, and when they joined battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines, and they slew of the army in the field about 4,000 men. Verse 3, and when the people were come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us, that, when it cometh among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies. Verse 4, so the people sent to Shiloh, that they might bring from thence the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, which dwelt between the cherubims. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. Verse 5, and when the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth rang again. Verse 6, and when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, What meaned the noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews? And they understood that the ark of the Lord was come into the camp. Verse 7, and the Philistines were afraid, for they said, God is come into the camp. And they said, Woe unto us! For there hath not been such a thing heretofore. Verse 8, Woe unto us! Who shall deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. Verse 9, Be strong, and quit yourselves like men, O ye Philistines, that ye be not servants unto the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Quit yourselves like men, and fight. Verse 10, and the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten, and they fled every man into his tent, and there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. Verse 11, and the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were slain. Verse 12, and there ran a man of Benjamin out of the army, and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes rent, and with earth upon his head. Verse 13, and when he came, lo, Eli sat upon a seat by the wayside watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city, and told it, all the city cried out. Verse 14, and when Eli heard the noise of the crying, he said, What meaned the noise of this tumult? And the man came in hastily, and told Eli. Verse 15, now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were dim, that he could not see. Verse 16, and the man said unto Eli, I am he that came out of the army, and I fled today out of the army. And he said, What is there done, my son? Verse 17, and the messenger answered and said, Israel is fled before the Philistines, and there hath been also a great slaughter among the people, and thy two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God is taken. Verse 18, and it came to pass, when he made mention of the ark of God, that he fell from off the seat backward by the side of the gate, and his neck brake, and he died, for he was an old man, and heavy. And he had judged Israel 40 years. Verse 19, and his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, near to be delivered. And when she heard the tidings that the ark of God was taken, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and travailed, for her pains came upon her. Verse 20, and about the time of her death the women that stood by her said unto her, Fear not, for thou hast borne a son. But she answered not, neither did she regard it. Verse 21, and she named the child Ichebed, saying, The glory is departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. Verse 22, and she said, The glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. First book of Samuel chapter 5. Verse 1, and the Philistines took the ark of God, and brought it from Ebenezer unto Ashdod. Verse 2, when the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon, and set it by Dagon. Verse 3, and when they avashed it arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon, and set him in his place again. Verse 4, and when they arose early on the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold, only the stump of Dagon was left to him. Verse 5, therefore neither the priests of Dagon, nor any that come into Dagon's house, tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod unto this day. Verse 6, but the hand of the Lord was heavy upon them of Ashdod, and he destroyed them, and smote them with emerods, even Ashdod and the coasts thereof. Verse 7, and when the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, the ark of the God of Israel shall not abide with us, for his hand is sore upon us, and upon Dagon our God. Verse 8, they sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines unto them, and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they answered, let the ark of the God of Israel be carried about unto Gath. And they carried the ark of the God of Israel about thither. Verse 9, and it was so, that, after they had carried it about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a very great destruction. And he smote the men of the city, both small and great, and they had emerods in their secret parts. Verse 10, therefore they sent the ark of God to Cran. And it came to pass, as the ark of God came to Cran, that the Cranites cried out, saying, they have brought about the ark of the God of Israel to us, to slay us and our people. Verse 11, so they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines, and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it go again to his own place, that it slay us not, and our people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there. Verse 12, and the men that died not were smitten with the emerods, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. First Book of Samuel chapter 6. Verse 1, and the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. Verse 2, and the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do to the ark of the Lord? Tell us wherewith we shall send it to his place. Verse 3, and they said, if ye send away the ark of the God of Israel, send it not empty, but in any wise return him a trespass offering, then ye shall be healed, and it shall be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Verse 4, then said they, what shall be the trespass offering which we shall return to him? They answered, 5 golden emerods, and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines, for one plague was on you all, and on your lords. Verse 5, wherefore ye shall make images of your emerods, and images of your mice that march the land, and ye shall give glory unto the God of Israel. Peradventure he will lighten his hand from off you, and from off your gods, and from off your land. Verse 6, wherefore then do ye harden your hearts, as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When he had wrought wonderfully among them, did they not bid the people go, and they departed? Verse 7, now therefore make a new cart, and take 2 milchkine, on which there had come no yoke, and tie that came to the cart, and bring their calves home from them. Verse 8, and take the ark of the Lord, and lay it upon the cart, and put the jewels of gold, which ye return them for trespass offering, in a coffer by the side thereof, and send it away, that it may go. Verse 9, and see, if it goeth up by the way of his own coast to Bethshemesh, then he hath done us this great evil. But if not, then we shall know that is not his hand that smote us, it was a chance that happened to us. Verse 10, and the men did so, and took 2 milchkine, and tied them to the cart, and shut up their calves at home. Verse 11, and they laid the ark of the Lord upon the cart, and the coffer with the mice of gold and the images of their emerods. Verse 12, and the king took the straight way to the way of Bethshemesh, and went along the highway, lowing as they went, and turned not aside to the right hand or to the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them unto the border of Bethshemesh. Verse 13, and they of Bethshemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, and they lifted up their eyes, and saw the ark, and rejoiced to see it. Verse 14, and the cart came into the field of Joshua of Beth-Shammite, and stood there, where there was a great stone. And they clove the wood of the cart, and offered the king a burnt offering unto the Lord. Verse 15, and the Levites took down the ark of the Lord, and the coffer that was with it, wherein the jewels of gold were, and put them on the great stone. And the men of Beth-Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices the same day unto the Lord. Verse 16, and when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they returned to Cren the same day. Verse 17, and these are the golden emeralds which the Philistines returned for trespass offering unto the Lord. For Ashdod 1, for Gaza 1, for Askelon 1, for Gath 1, for Cren 1. Verse 18, and the golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines, belonging to the 5 lords, both the fenced cities, and of country villages, even unto the great stone of Abel, wherein they set down the ark of the Lord, which stone remaineth unto this day in the field of Joshua, the Beth-Shemite. Verse 19, and he smote the men of Beth-Shemesh, because they had looked into the ark of the Lord, even he smote of the people 50,010 men. And the people lamented, because the Lord had smitten many of the people with a great slaughter. Verse 20, and the men of Beth-Shemesh said, who is able to stand before this holy Lord God? And to whom shall he go up from us? Verse 21, and they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kirjath-jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought again the ark of the Lord. Come ye down, and fetch it up to you. First Book of Samuel chapter 7. Verse 1, and the men of Kirjath-jearim came, and fetched up the ark of the Lord, and brought it into the house of Abinadab in the hill, and sanctified Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. Verse 2, and it came to pass, while the ark abode in Kirjath-jearim, that the time was long, for it was 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. Verse 3, and Samuel spake unto all the house of Israel, saying, if ye do return unto the Lord with all your hearts, then put away the strange gods and Ashtaroth from among you, and prepare your hearts unto the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. Verse 4, then the children of Israel did put away Baalim and Ashtaroth, and served the Lord only. Verse 5, and Samuel said, gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray for you unto the Lord. Verse 6, and they gathered together to Mizpah, and drew water, and put it out before the Lord, and fasted on that day, and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the children of Israel in Mizpah. Verse 7, and when the Philistines heard that the children of Israel were gathered together to Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the children of Israel heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. Verse 8, and the children of Israel said to Samuel, cease not to cry unto the Lord our God for us, that he will save us out of the hand of the Philistines. Verse 9, and Samuel took a sucking lamb, and offered it for a burnt offering holy unto the Lord. And Samuel cried unto the Lord for Israel, and the Lord heard him. Verse 10, and as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But the Lord thundered with a great thunder on that day upon the Philistines, and discomfited them, and they were smitten before Israel. Verse 11, and the men of Israel went out of Mizpah, and pursued the Philistines, and smote them, until they came unto Beth-kar. Verse 12, then Samuel took a stone, and set it between Mizpah and Shen, and called the name of it Ebenezer, saying, hitherto had the Lord helped us. Verse 13, so the Philistines were subdued, and they came no more into the coast of Israel, and the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. Verse 14, and the cities which the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Cren even unto Gath. And the coasts thereof did Israel deliver out of the hands of the Philistines. And there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Verse 15, and Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. Verse 16, and he went from year to year in circuit to Bethel, and Gilgal, and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places. Verse 17, and his return was to Ramah, for there was his house, and there he judged Israel. And there he built an altar unto the Lord. First Book of Samuel chapter 8. Verse 1, And it came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Verse 2, Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second, Edda. They were judges in Beersheba. Verse 3, And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. Verse 4, Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah. Verse 5, And said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. Verse 6, But the thing displeased Samuel, when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. Verse 7, And the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. Verse 8, According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me, and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Verse 9, Now therefore hearken unto their voice. But yet protest solemnly unto them, and shew them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Verse 10, And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. Verse 11, And he said, This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons, and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. Verse 12, And he will appoint him captains over thousands, and captains over fifties, and will set them to wear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war, and instruments of his chariots. Verse 13, And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. Verse 14, And he will take your fields, and your vineyards, and your olivyards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. Verse 15, And he will take the tenth of your seed, and of your vineyards, and give to his officers, and to his servants. Verse 16, And he will take your manservants, and your maidservants, and your goodliest young men, and your asses, and put them to his work. Verse 17, He will take the tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. Verse 18, And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king which ye shall have chosen you, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Verse 19, Nevertheless the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us. Verse 20, That we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us, and go out before us, and fight our battles. Verse 21, And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he rehearsed them in the ears of the Lord. Verse 22, And the Lord said to Samuel, Hearken unto their voice, and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the men of Israel, Go ye every man unto his city. First Book of Samuel chapter 9. Verse 1, Now there was a man at Benjamin, whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zerah, the son of Korath, the son of Aphiah, of Benjamin, a mighty man in power. Verse 2, And he had a son, whose name was Saul, a choice young man, and a goodly. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders unto foot he was higher than any of the people. Verse 3, And the asses of Kish Saul's father were lost. And Kish said to Saul his son, Take now one of the servants with thee, and rise, go seek the asses. Verse 4, And he passed through Mount Ephraim, and passed through the land of Shalisha, but they found them not. Then they passed through the land of Shahalaim, and there they were not. And he passed through the land of the Benjamites, but they found them not. Verse 5, And when they were come to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant that was with him, Come, and let us return, lest my father leave caring for the asses, and take thought for us. Verse 6, And he said unto him, Behold now, there is in this city a man of God, and he is an honorable man. All that he said cometh surely to pass. Now let us go thither. Peradventure he can shew us a way that we should go. Verse 7, Then said Saul to his servant, But, behold, if we go, what shall we bring the man? For the bread is spent in our vessels, and there is not a present to bring to the man of God. What have we? Verse 8, And the servant answered Saul again, and said, Behold, I have here at hand the fourth part of a shekel of silver, that will I give to the man of God, to tell us our way. Verse 9, Before I'm in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, thus he spake, Come, and let us go to the seer, for he that is now called a prophet was before I'm called a seer. Verse 10, Then said Saul to his servant, Well said, Come, let us go. So they went unto the city where the man of God was. Verse 11, And as they went up the hill to the city, they found young maidens going out to draw water, and said unto them, Is the seer here? Verse 12, And they answered them, and said, He is. Behold, he is before you. Make haste now, for he came today to the city. For there is a sacrifice of the people today in the high place. Verse 13, As soon as ye be come into the city, ye shall straightway find him, before he go up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat until he come, because he doth bless the sacrifice, and afterwards they eat that be bidden. Now therefore get you up, for about this time ye shall find him. Verse 14, And they went up into the city. And when they were come into the city, behold, Samuel came out against them, for to go up to the high place. Verse 15, Now the Lord had told Samuel in Israel a day before Saul came, saying, Verse 16, Tomorrow about this time I will send thee a man out of the land of Benjamin, and thou shalt anoint him to be captain over my people Israel, that he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines. For I have looked upon my people, because their cries come unto me. Verse 17, And when Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said unto him, Behold the man whom I spake to thee of. This same shall reign over my people. Verse 18, Then Saul drew near to Samuel in the gate, and said, Tell me, I pray thee, where the seer's house is. Verse 19, And Samuel answered Saul, and said, I am the seer, go up before me unto the high place. For ye shall eat with me today, and tomorrow I will let thee go, and will tell thee all that is in thine heart. Verse 20, And as for thine asses that were lost 3 days ago, set not thy mind on them, for they are found. And on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on thee, and on all thy father's house? Verse 21, And Saul answered and said, Am not I a Benjamin, of the smallest of the tribes of Israel? And my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Wherefore then speakest thou so to me? Verse 22, And Samuel took Saul and his servant, and brought them into the parlor, and made them sit in the chiefest place among them that were bidden, which were about 30 persons. Verse 23, And Samuel said unto the cook, Bring the portion which I gave thee, and which I said unto thee, set it by thee. Verse 24, And the cook took up the shoulder, and that which was upon it, and set it before Saul. And Samuel said, Behold that which is left. Set it before thee, and eat. For unto this time hath it been kept for thee since I said, I have invited the people. So Saul did eat with Samuel that day. Verse 25, And when they were come down from the high place into the city, Samuel commoned with Saul upon the top of the house. Verse 26, And they arose early, and it came to pass about the spring of the day, that Samuel called Saul to the top of the house, saying, Up, that I may send thee away. And Saul arose, and they went out both of them, he and Samuel, abroad. Verse 27, And as they were going down to the end of the city, Samuel said to Saul, Bid the servant pass on before us, and he passed on, but stand thou still a while, that I may shew thee the word of God. First Book of Samuel chapter 10. Verse 1, Then Samuel took a vial of oil, and put it upon his head, and kissed him, and said, Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance? Verse 2, When thou art departed from me today, then thou shalt find 2 men by Rachel's sepulchre in the border of Benjamin at Zelzah. And they will say unto thee, The asses which thou wentst to seek are found. And, lo, thy father hath left the care of the asses, and sorroweth for you, saying, What shall I do for my son? Verse 3, Then shalt thou go on forward from thence, and thou shalt come to the plain of Tabor, and there shall meet thee 3 men going up to God to Bethel, one carrying 3 kids, and another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a bottle of wine. Verse 4, And they will salute thee, and give thee 2 loaves of bread, which thou shalt receive at their hands. Verse 5, After that thou shalt come to the hill of God, where is the garrison of the Philistines. And it shall come to pass, when thou art come thither to the city, that thou shalt meet a company of prophets coming down from the high place with a psaltery, and a tabret, and a pipe, and a harp, before them, and they shall prophesy. Verse 6, And the Spirit of the Lord will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with them, and shalt be turned into another man. Verse 7, And let it be, when these signs are come unto thee, that thou do as occasion serve thee, for God is with thee. Verse 8, And thou shalt go down before me to Gilgal, and, behold, I will come down unto thee, to offer burnt offerings, and to sacrifice sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days shalt thou tarry, till I come to thee, and shew thee what thou shalt do. Verse 9, And it was so, that when he had turned his back to go from Samuel, God gave him another heart, and all those signs came to pass that day. Verse 10, And when they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. Verse 11, And it came to pass, when all that knew beforetime saw that, behold, he prophesied among the prophets. Then the people said one to another, What is this that is come unto the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets? Verse 12, And one of the same place answered and said, But who was their father? Therefore it became a proverb, Is Saul also among the prophets? Verse 13, And when he had made an end of prophesying, he came to the high place. Verse 14, And Saul's uncle said unto him and to his servant, Whither went ye? And he said, To seek the asses. And when we saw that they were nowhere, we came to Samuel. Verse 15, And Saul's uncle said, Tell me, I pray thee, what Samuel said unto you. Verse 16, And Saul said unto his uncle, He told us plainly that the asses were found. But of the matter of the kingdom, whereof Samuel spake, he told him not. Verse 17, And Samuel called the people together unto the Lord to Mizpah. Verse 18, And said unto the children of Israel, Thus said the Lord God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt, and delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all kingdoms, and of them that oppressed you. Verse 19, And ye have this day rejected your God, who himself saved you out of all your adversities and your tribulations. And ye have said unto him, Nay, but set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes, and by your thousands. Verse 20, And when Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was taken. Verse 21, When he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of Matri was taken, and Saul the son of Kish was taken. And when they sought him, he could not be found. Verse 22, Therefore they inquired of the Lord further, if the man should yet come thither. And the Lord answered, Behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff. Verse 23, And they ran and fetched him thence. And when he stood among the people, he was higher than any of the people from his shoulders and upward. Verse 24, And Samuel said to all the people, See ye him whom the Lord hath chosen, that there is none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted, and said, God save the king. Verse 25, Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom, and wrote it in a book, and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. Verse 26, And Saul also went home to Gibeah, and there went with him a band of men, whose hearts God had touched. Verse 27, But the children of Israel said, How shall this man save us? And they despised him, and brought him no presents. But he held his peace. First Book of Samuel chapter 11. Verse 1, Then Nahash the Ammonite came up, and encamped against Jabesh-Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. Verse 2, And Nahash the Ammonite answered them, On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes, and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel. Verse 3, And the elders of Jabesh said unto him, Give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers unto all the coasts of Israel. and then, if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. Verse 4, Then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul, and told the tidings in the ears of the people, and all the people lifted up their voices, and wept. Verse 5, And, behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field, and Saul said, What ail the people that they weep? And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. Verse 6, And the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard those tidings, and his anger was kindled greatly. Verse 7, And he took a yoke of oxen, and hewed them in pieces, and sent them throughout all the coasts of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, Whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. And the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. Verse 8, And when he numbered them in Bezek, the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. Verse 9, And they said unto the messengers that came, Thus shall ye say unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, Tomorrow, by the time the sun be hot, ye shall have help. And the messengers came and shouted to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. Verse 10, Therefore the men of Jabesh said, Tomorrow we will come out unto you, and ye shall do with us all that seemed good unto you. Verse 11, And it was so on the morrow, that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the host in the morning watch, and slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it came to pass, that they which remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not knit together. Verse 12, And the people said unto Samuel, Who was he that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring them in, that we may put them to death. Verse 13, And Saul said, There shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath brought salvation in Israel. Verse 14, Then said Samuel to the people, Come, and let us go to Gilgal, and renew the kingdom there. Verse 15, And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal, and there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. First Book of Samuel chapter 12. Verse 1, And Samuel said unto all Israel, Behold, I have hearkened unto your voice in all that ye said unto me, and have made a king over you. Verse 2, And now, behold, the king walketh before you, and I am old and great, and, behold, my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from my childhood unto this day. Verse 3, Behold, here I am, witness against me before the Lord, and before his anointed, whose ox have I taken? Or whose ass have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or of whose hand have I received any bribe to blind mine eyes tear with? And I will restore it you. Verse 4, And they said, Thou hast not defrauded us, nor oppressed us, neither hast thou taken it of any man's hand. Verse 5, And he said unto them, The Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that ye have not found out in my hand. And they answered, He is witness. Verse 6, And Samuel said unto the people, It is the Lord that advanced Moses and Aaron, and that brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. Verse 7, Now therefore stand still, that I may reason with you before the Lord of all the righteous acts of the Lord, which he did to you and to your fathers. Verse 8, When Jacob was come into Egypt, and your fathers cried unto the Lord, then the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, which brought forth your fathers out of Egypt, and made them dwell in this place. Verse 9, And when they forgot the Lord their God, he sold them into the hand of Sisera, captain of the host of Hazor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against them. Verse 10, And they cried unto the Lord, and said, We have sinned, because we have forsaken the Lord, and have served Baalim and Ashtaroth. But now deliver us out of the hand of our enemies, and we will serve thee. Verse 11, And the Lord sent Jerubbaal, and Bedan, and Jephthah, and Samuel, and deliver you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and ye dwell safe. Verse 12, And when ye saw that Nahash the king of the children of Ammon came against you, ye said unto me, Nay, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord your God was your king. Verse 13, Now therefore behold the king whom ye have chosen, and whom ye have desired. And, behold, the Lord hath set a king over you, Verse 14, if ye will fear the Lord, and serve him, and obey his voice, and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall both ye and also that king that reigneth over you continue following the Lord your God. Verse 15, but if ye will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall the hand of the Lord be against you, as it was against your fathers. Verse 16, now therefore stand and see this great thing, which the Lord will do before your eyes. Verse 17, is it not wheat harvest today? I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain, that ye may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which ye have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking you a king. Verse 18, so Samuel called unto the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. Verse 19, and all the people said unto Samuel, pray for thy servants unto the Lord thy God, that we die not, for we have aided unto all our sins this evil, to ask us a king. Verse 20, and Samuel said unto the people, fear not, ye have done all this wickedness, yet turn not aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Verse 21, and turn ye not aside, for then should ye go after vain things, which cannot profit nor deliver, for they are vain. Verse 22, for the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it hath pleased the Lord to make you his people. Verse 23, moreover as for me, God forbid that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you, but I will teach you the good and the right way. Verse 24, only fear the Lord, and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider how great things he hath done for you. Verse 25, but if ye shall still do wickedly, ye shall be consumed, both ye and your king. First Book of Samuel chapter 13. Verse 1, Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel. Verse 2, Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel, whereof 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in Mount Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah Benjamin, and the rest of the people he sent every man to his tent. Verse 3, and Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. Verse 4, and all Israel heard say that Saul had smitten a garrison of the Philistines, and that Israel also was had an abomination with the Philistines. And the people were called together after Saul to Gilgal. Verse 5, and the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots, and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up, and pitched in Michmash, eastward from Beth-avel. Verse 6, when the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were distressed, then the people did hide themselves in caves, and in thickets, and in rocks, and in high places, and in pits. Verse 7, and some of the Hebrews went over Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. Verse 8, and he tarried 7 days, according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. Verse 9, and Saul said, bring hither a burnt offering to me, and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. Verse 10, and it came to pass, that, as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. Verse 11, and Samuel said, what hast thou done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Verse 12, therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself therefore, and offered a burnt offering. Verse 13, and Samuel said to Saul, thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee, for now the Lord hath established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. Verse 14, but now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. Verse 15, and Samuel arose, and gat him up from Gilgal unto Gibeah of Benjamin. And Saul numbered the people that were present with him, about 600 men. Verse 16, and Saul, and Jonathan his son, and the people that were present with him, abode in Gibeah of Benjamin. But the Philistines encamped in Michmash. Verse 17, and the spoilers came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned unto the way that leadeth to Ephraim, unto the land of Shual. Verse 18, and another company turned the way to Bethhoron. And another company turned to the way of the border that looked to the valley of Zebulun toward the wilderness. Verse 19, now there was no smith found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. Verse 20, but all the Israelites went down to the Philistines, to sharpen every man his share, and his coulter, and his axe, and his mattock. Verse 21, yet they had a file for the mattocks, and for the coulters, and for the forks, and for the axes, and to sharpen the goads. Verse 22, so it came to pass in the day of battle, that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan. But with Saul and with Jonathan his son was there found. Verse 23, and the garrison of the Philistines went out to the passage of Michmash. First book of Samuel chapter 14. Verse 1, now it came to pass upon the day, that Jonathan the son of Saul said unto the young man that bare his armor, come, and let us go over to the Philistines' garrison, that is on the other side. But he told not his father. Verse 2, and Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree which is in Migron. And the people that were with him were about 600 men. Verse 3, and Ahiah, the son of Ahid, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. And the people knew not that Jonathan was gone. Verse 4, and between the passages, by which Jonathan sought to go over unto the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on the one side and a sharp rock on the other side, and the name of the one was Bezez, and the name of the other San. Verse 5, the forefront of the one was situate northward over against Michmash, and the other southward over against Gibeah. Verse 6, and Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, come, and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. Verse 7, and his armor-bearer said unto him, do all that is in thine heart. Turn thee, behold, I am with thee according to thy heart. Verse 8, then said Jonathan, behold, we will pass over unto these men, and we will discover ourselves unto them. Verse 9, if they say thus unto us, tarry until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place, and will not go up unto them. Verse 10, but if they say thus, come up unto us, then we will go up, for the Lord hath delivered them into our hand, and this shall be a sign unto us. Verse 11, and both of them discovered themselves unto the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes where they had hid themselves. Verse 12, and the men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor-bearer, and said, come up to us, and we will shew you a thing. And Jonathan said unto his armor-bearer, come up after me, for the Lord hath delivered them into the hand of Israel. Verse 13, and Jonathan climbed up upon his hands and upon his feet, and his armor-bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer slew after him. Verse 14, and that first slaughter, which Jonathan and his armor-bearer made, was about 20 men, within as it were an half-acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow. Verse 15, and there was trembling in the host, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison, and the spoilers, they also trembled, and the earth quaked, so it was a very great trembling. Verse 16, and the watchmen of Saul and Gibeah Benjamin looked, and, behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on eating down one another. Verse 17, then said Saul unto the people that were with him, number now, and see who was gone from us. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. Verse 18, And Saul said unto Ahiah, Bring hither the ark of God. For the ark of God was at that time with the children of Israel. Verse 19, And it came to pass, while Saul talked unto the priest, that the noise that was in the host of the Philistines went on and increased. And Saul said unto the priest, Withdraw thine hand. Verse 20, And Saul and all the people that were with him assembled themselves, and they came to the battle. And, behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great discomfiture. Verse 21, Moreover the Hebrews that were with the Philistines before that time, which went up with them into the camp from the country round about, even they also turned to be with the Israelites that were with Saul and Jonathan. Verse 22, Likewise all the men of Israel which had hid themselves in Mount Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines fled, even they also followed hard after them in the battle. Verse 23, So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over unto Beth-avel. Verse 24, And the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had adjured the people, saying, Cursed be the man that eateth any food until evening, that I may be avenged on mine enemies. So none of the people tasted any food. Verse 25, And all they of the land came to a wood, and there was honey upon the ground. Verse 26, And when the people would come into the wood, behold, the honey dropped, but no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. Verse 27, But Jonathan heard not when his father charged the people with the oath. Wherefore he put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand, and dipped it in an honeycomb, and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes were enlightened. Verse 28, Then answered one of the people, and said, Thy father straitly charged the people with an oath, saying, Cursed be the man that eateth any food this day. And the people were faint. Verse 29, Then said Jonathan, My father hath troubled the land. See, I pray you, how mine eyes have been enlightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. Verse 30, How much more, if haply the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they found? For had there not been now a much greater slaughter among the Philistines? Verse 31, And they smote the Philistines that day from Michmash to Ajalon, and the people were very faint. Verse 32, And the people flew upon the spoil, and took sheep, and oxen, and calves, and slew them on the ground, and the people did eat them with the blood. Verse 33, Then they told Saul, saying, Behold, the people sin against the Lord, in that they eat with the blood. And he said, Ye have transgressed. Roll a great stone unto me this day. Verse 34, And Saul said, Disperse yourselves among the people, and say unto them, Bring me hither every man his ox, and every man his sheep, and slay them here, and eat, and sin not against the Lord in eating with the blood. And all the people brought every man his ox with him that night, and slew them there. Verse 35, And Saul built an altar unto the Lord. The same was the first altar that he built unto the Lord. Verse 36, And Saul said, Let us go down after the Philistines by night, and spoil them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man of them. And they said, Do whatsoever seemed good unto thee. Then said the priest, Let us draw near hither unto God. Verse 37, And Saul asked counsel of God, Shall I go down after the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into the hand of Israel? But he answered him not that day. Verse 38, And Saul said, Draw ye near hither, all the chief of the people, and no one see wherein the sin hath been this day. Verse 39, For, as the Lord liveth, which saveth Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But there was not a man among all the people that answered him. Verse 40, Then said he unto all Israel, Be ye on one side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other side. And the people said unto Saul, Do what seemed good unto thee. Verse 41, Therefore Saul said unto the Lord God of Israel, Give a perfect lot. And Saul and Jonathan were taken, but the people escaped. Verse 42, And Saul said, Cast lots between me and Jonathan my son. And Jonathan was taken. Verse 43, Then Saul said to Jonathan, Tell me what thou hast done. And Jonathan told him, and said, I did but taste a little honey with the end of the rod that was in mine hand, and, lo, I must die. Verse 44, and Saul answered, God do so and more also, for thou shalt surely die, Jonathan. Verse 45, and the people said unto Saul, Shall Jonathan die, who hath wrought this great salvation in Israel? God forbid, as the Lord liveth, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he hath wrought with God this day. So the people rescued Jonathan, that he died not. Verse 46, then Saul went up from following the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Verse 47, so Saul took the kingdom over Israel, and fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, and against the children of Ammon, and against Am, and against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. And whithersoever he turned himself, he vexed them. Verse 48, and he gathered an host, and smote the Amalekites, and delivered Israel out of the hands of them that spoiled them. Verse 49, now the sons of Saul were Jonathan, and Ishui, and Malchishua, and the names of his 2 daughters were these, the name of the firstborn Red, and the name of the younger Michal. Verse 50, and the name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, the daughter of Ahimaaz, and the name of the captain of his host was Abner, the son of Ner, Saul's uncle. Verse 51, and Kish was the father of Saul, and the father of Abner was the son of Abiel. Verse 52, and there was sore war against the Philistines all the days of Saul, and when Saul saw any strong man, or any valiant man, he took him unto him. First Book of Samuel chapter 15. Verse 1, Samuel also said unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken not unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Verse 2, Thus said the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way, when he came up from Egypt. Verse 3, Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. Verse 4, and Saul gathered the people together, and numbered them in Elam, 200,000 footmen, and 10,000 men of Judah. Verse 5, and Saul came to a city of Amalek, and laid wait in the valley. Verse 6, and Saul said unto the Kenites, Go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For ye shall contest to all the children of Israel, when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. Verse 7, and Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. Verse 8, and he took Agag the king of the Amalekites alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Verse 9, but Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. Verse 10, then came the word of the Lord unto Samuel, saying, Verse 11, It repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he is turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. Verse 12, and when Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and, behold, he set him up a place, and is gone about, and passed on, and gone down to Gilgal. Verse 13, and Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said unto him, Blessed be thou of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. Verse 14, and Samuel said, What mean then this bleating of the sheep in mine ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? Verse 15, and Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Verse 16, then Samuel said unto Saul, Stay, and I will tell thee what the Lord hath said to me this night. And he said unto him, Say on. Verse 17, and Samuel said, When thou wast little in thine own sight, wast thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed thee king over Israel? Verse 18, And the Lord sent thee on a journey, and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners the Amalekites, and fight against them until they be consumed. Verse 19, Wherefore then didst thou not obey the voice of the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and didst evil in the sight of the Lord? Verse 20, And Saul said unto Samuel, Yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone away which the Lord sent me, and have brought Agag the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. Verse 21, But the people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gilgal. Verse 22, And Samuel said, Have the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and a heart than the fat of rams. Verse 23, For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. Verse 24, And Saul said unto Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and thy words, because I feared the people, and obeyed their voice. Verse 25, Now therefore, I pray thee, pardon my sin, and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord. Verse 26, And Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with thee, for thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord hath rejected thee from being king over Israel. Verse 27, And as Samuel turned about to go away, he laid hold upon the skirt of his mantle, and it rent. Verse 28, And Samuel said unto him, The Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to a neighbor of thine, that is better than thou. Verse 29, And also the strength of Israel will not lie nor repent, for he is not a man, that he should repent. Verse 30, Then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now, I pray thee, before the elders of my people, and before Israel, and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord thy God. Verse 31, So Samuel turned again after Saul, and Saul worshipped the Lord. Verse 32, Then said Samuel, Bring ye hither to me Agag the king of the Amalekites. And Agag came unto him delicately. And Agag said, Surely the bitterness of death is past. Verse 33, And Samuel said, As thy sword hath made women childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women. And Samuel held Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Verse 34, Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house to Gibeah of Saul. Verse 35, And Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord repented that he had made Saul king over Israel. First Book of Samuel chapter 16. Verse 1, And the Lord said unto Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil, and go, I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. Verse 2, And Samuel said, How can I go? If Saul hear it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take an heifer with thee, and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. Verse 3, And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will shew thee what thou shalt do, and thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee. Verse 4, And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem. And the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Comest thou peaceably? Verse 5, And he said, Peaceably, I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons, and called them to the sacrifice. Verse 6, And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked on Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. Verse 7, But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looked on the heart. Verse 8, Then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither had the Lord chosen this. Verse 9, Then Jesse made Shahima to pass by. And he said, neither had the Lord chosen this. Verse 10, again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, the Lord hath not chosen these. Verse 11, and Samuel said unto Jesse, I hear all thy children. And he said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and, behold, he keep the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, sit and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. Verse 12, and he sent, and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal have a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Verse 13, then Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from the day forward. So Samuel rose up, and went to Ramah. Verse 14, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. Verse 15, and Saul's servants said unto him, behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Verse 16, let our Lord now command thy servants, which are before thee, to seek out a man, who is a cunning player on an harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. Verse 17, and Saul said unto his servants, provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Verse 18, then answered one of the servants, and said, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Verse 19, wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse, and said, send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. Verse 20, and Jesse took an ass laden with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David his son unto Saul. Verse 21, and David came to Saul, and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor-bearer. Verse 22, and Saul sent to Jesse, saying, let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. Verse 23, and it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp, and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed, and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. First Book of Samuel chapter 17. Verse 1, now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shochoh, which belonged to Judah, and pitched between Shochoh and Ezgah, in its damming. Verse 2, and Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. Verse 3, and the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. Verse 4, and there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath, of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Verse 5, and he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. Verse 6, and he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. Verse 7, and the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. Verse 8, and he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. Verse 9, if ye be able to fight with me, and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him, and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and service. Verse 10, and the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. Verse 11, when Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed, and greatly afraid. Verse 12, now David was the son of Ephrathah at Bethlehem Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. Verse 13, and the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle, And the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shahama. Verse 14, and David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. Verse 15, but David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Verse 16, and the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. Verse 17, and Jesse said unto David his son, take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. Verse 18, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Verse 19, now Saul, and they, and all the men of Israel, were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. Verse 20, and David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with a keeper, and took, and went, as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench, as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. Verse 21, for Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. Verse 22, and David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. Verse 23, and as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. Verse 24, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. Verse 25, and the men of Israel said, have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be, that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. Verse 26, and David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who was this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? Verse 27, and the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that killeth him. Verse 28, and Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride, and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. Verse 29, and David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? Verse 30, and he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner, and the people answered him again after the former manner. Verse 31, and when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. Verse 32, and David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Verse 33, and Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. Verse 34, and David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. Verse 35, and I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Verse 36, thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath to fight the armies of the living God. Verse 37, David said moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. Verse 38, and Saul armed David with his armor, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head, also that he armed him with a coat of mail. Verse 39, and David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. Verse 40, and he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Verse 41, And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. Verse 42, And when the Philistine looked about, and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. Verse 43, And the Philistine said unto David, My dog, that thou comest to me with staves. And the Philistine cursed David by his guts. Verse 44, And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Verse 45, Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. Verse 46, This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Verse 47, And all this assembly shall know that the Lord serveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Verse 48, And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose, and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Verse 49, And David put his hand in his back, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. Verse 50, So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Verse 51, Therefore David ran, and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. Verse 52, And the men of Israel and of Judah arose, and shouted, and pursued the Philistines, until they come to the valley, and to the gates of Cran. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Sharam, even unto Gath, and unto Cran. Verse 53, And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. Verse 54, And David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. Verse 55, And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. Verse 56, And the king said, Inquire thou whose son Astriphiel is. Verse 57, And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him, and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. Verse 58, And Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. First Book of Samuel chapter 18. Verse 1, And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Verse 2, And Saul took him that day, and would let him go no more home to his father's house. Verse 3, Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. Verse 4, And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. Verse 5, And David went out whithersoever Saul sent him, and behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. Verse 6, And it came to pass as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out of all cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul, with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. Verse 7, And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Verse 8, And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? Verse 9, And Saul eyed David from the day and forward. Verse 10, And it came to pass on the morrow, that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his hand, as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. Verse 11, And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. Verse 12, And Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, and was departed from Saul. Verse 13, Therefore Saul removed him from him, and made him his captain over 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. Verse 14, And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Verse 15, Wherefore when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. Verse 16, But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them. Verse 17, And Saul said to David, Behold my elder daughter Imred, her will I give thee to wife. Only be thou valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. Verse 18, And David said unto Saul, Who am I? And what is my life, or my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? Verse 19, But it came to pass at the time when Imred Saul's daughter should have been given to David, that she was given unto Adriel the Meholathite to wife. Verse 20, And Michal Saul's daughter loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Verse 21, And Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, Thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain. Verse 22, And Saul commanded his servants, saying, Come in with David's seed quickly, and say, Behold, the king hath delight in thee, and all his servants love thee. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. Verse 23, And Saul's servants spake those words in the ears of David. And David said, Seeing fit to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man, and lightly esteemed. Verse 24, And the servants of Saul told him, saying, On this manner spake David. Verse 25, And Saul said, Thus shall ye say to David, The king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Verse 26, And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. Verse 27, Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal his daughter to wife. Verse 28, And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal Saul's daughter loved him. Verse 29, And Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. Verse 30, Then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass, after they went forth, that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much said by. First Book of Samuel chapter 19. Verse 1, And Saul spake to Jonathan his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David. Verse 2, But Jonathan Saul's son delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeks to kill thee. Now therefore, I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. Verse 3, And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see, that I will tell thee. Verse 4, And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to Tyrwhit very good. Verse 5, For he did put his life in his hand, and slew the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood, to slay David without a cause? Verse 6, And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan. And Saul sware, As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. Verse 7, And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all those things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence, as in times past. Verse 8, And there was war again. And David went out, and fought with the Philistines, and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fled from him. Verse 9, And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul, as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. Verse 10, And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with a javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled, and escaped that night. Verse 11, Saul also sent messengers unto David's house, to watch him, and to slay him in the morning. And Michal David's wife told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. Verse 12, So Michal let David down through a window, and he went, and fled, and escaped. Verse 13, And Michal took an image, and laid it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster, and covered it with a cloth. Verse 14, And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, He is sick. Verse 15, And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may slay him. Verse 16, And when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed, with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. Verse 17, And Saul said unto Michal, Why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy, that he is escaped? And Michal answered Saul, He said unto me, Let me go, why should I kill thee? Verse 18, So David fled, and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. Verse 19, And it was told Saul, saying, Behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. Verse 20, And Saul sent messengers to take David. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing as appointed over them, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. Verse 21, And when it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they prophesied likewise. And Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they prophesied also. Verse 22, Then went he also to Ramah, and came to a great well that is in Succu. And he asked and said, Where are Samuel and David? And one said, Behold, they be at Naioth in Ramah. Verse 23, And he went thither to Naioth in Ramah. And the Spirit of God was upon him also, and he went on, and prophesied, until he came to Naioth in Ramah. Verse 24, And he stripped off his clothes also, and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Wherefore they say, Is Saul also among the prophets? First Book of Samuel chapter 20. Verse 1, And David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, What have I done? What is mine iniquity? And what is my sin before thy father, that he seek my life? Verse 2, And he said unto him, God forbid, thou shalt not die. Behold, my father will do nothing either great or small, but that he will shew it me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so. Verse 3, And David said moreover, and said, Thy father certainly knoweth that I have found grace in thine eyes. And he said, Let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death. Verse 4, Then said Jonathan unto David, Whatsoever thy soul desireth, I will even do it for thee. Verse 5, And David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field unto the third day at even. Verse 6, If thy father at all miss me, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me that he might run to Bethlehem his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. Verse 7, If he say thus, It is well, thy servant shall have peace. But if he be very red, then be sure that evil is determined by him. Verse 8, Therefore thou shalt deal kindly with thy servant, for thou hast brought thy servant into a covenant of the Lord with thee. Notwithstanding, if there be in me iniquity, slay me thyself. For why shalt thou bring me to thy father? Verse 9, And Jonathan said, Far be it from thee, for if I knew certainly that evil were determined by my father to come upon thee, then would not I tell it thee. Verse 10, Then said David to Jonathan, Who shall tell me? Or what if thy father answer thee roughly? Verse 11, And Jonathan said unto David, Come, and let us go out into the field. And they went out both of them into the field. Verse 12, And Jonathan said unto David, O Lord God of Israel, when I have sounded my father about tomorrow any time, or the third day, and, behold, if there be good to David, and I then send not unto thee, and shew it thee. Verse 13, The Lord do so and much more to Jonathan. But if it please my father to do thee evil, then I will shew it thee, and send thee away, that thou mayst go in peace. And the Lord be with thee, as he hath been with my father. Verse 14, And thou shalt not only while yet I live shew me the kindness of the Lord, that I die not. Verse 15, But also thou shalt not cut off thy kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord hath cut off the enemies of David every one from the face of the earth. Verse 16, So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, Let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies. Verse 17, And Jonathan caused David to swear again, because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Verse 18, Then Jonathan said to David, Tomorrow is the new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty. Verse 19, And when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go down quickly, and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself when the business was in hand, and shalt remain by the stone Zel. Verse 20, And I will shoot 3 arrows on the side thereof, as though I shot at a mark. Verse 21, And, behold, I will send a lad, saying, Go, find out the arrows. If I expressly say unto the lad, Behold, the arrows are on this side of thee, take them, then come, for there is peace to thee, and no hurt, as the Lord liveth. Verse 22, But if I say thus unto the young man, Behold, the arrows are beyond thee, go thy way, for the Lord hath sent thee away. Verse 23, And as touching the matter which thou and I have spoken of, behold, the Lord be between thee and me forever. Verse 24, So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon was come, the king sat him down to eat meat. Verse 25, And the king sat upon his seat, as at other times, even upon his seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. Verse 26, Nevertheless Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought, Something hath befallen him, he is not clean. Surely he is not clean. Verse 27, And it came to pass on the morrow, which was the 2nd day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said unto Jonathan his son, Wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meat, neither yesterday, nor today? Verse 28, And Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. Verse 29, And he said, Let me go, I pray thee, for our family hath a sacrifice in the city, and my brother, he hath commanded me to be there. And now, if I have found favor in thine eyes, let me get away, I pray thee, and see my brethren. Therefore he cometh not unto the king's table. Verse 30, Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, Thou son of the perverse rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? Verse 31, For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. Verse 32, And Jonathan answered Saul his father, and said unto him, Wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? Verse 33, And Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. Verse 34, So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the 2nd day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. Verse 35, and it came to pass in the morning, that Jonathan went out into the field at the time appointed with David, and a little lad with him. Verse 36, and he said unto his lad, Run, find out now the arrows which I shoot. And as the lad ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. Verse 37, and when the lad was come to the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried after the lad, and said, Is not the arrow beyond thee? Verse 38, and Jonathan cried after the lad, Make speed, haste, stay not. And Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows, and came to his master. Verse 39, but the lad knew not anything, only Jonathan and David knew the matter. Verse 40, and Jonathan gave his artillery unto his lad, and said unto him, Go, carry them to the city. Verse 41, and as soon as the lad was gone, David arose out of a place toward the south, and fell on his face to the ground, and bowed himself 3 times. And they kissed one another, and wept one with another, until David exceeded. Verse 42, and Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, for rest, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And he rose and departed. And Jonathan went into the city. First Book of Samuel chapter 21. Verse 1, Then came David to Neg to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? Verse 2, And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I sent thee, and what I have commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Verse 3, Now therefore what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. Verse 4, And the priest answered David, and said, There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. Verse 5, And David answered the priest, and said unto him, Of a truth women have been kept from us about these 3 days, since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it was sanctified this day in the vessel. Verse 6, So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the shewbread, that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Verse 7, Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Dag, and Damite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. Verse 8, And David said unto Ahimelech, And is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. Verse 9, And the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the fed. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there is no other save that here. And David said, There is none like that, give it me. Verse 10, And David arose, and fled the day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish the king of Gath. Verse 11, And the servants of Achish said unto him, Is not this David the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Verse 12, And David laid up these words in his heart, and was sore afraid of Achish the king of Gath. Verse 13, And he changed his behavior before them, and feigned himself mad in their hands, and scrabbled on the doors of the gate, and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. Verse 14, Then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, ye see the man is mad, wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Verse 15, Have I need of madmen, that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? First Book of Samuel chapter 22. Verse 1, David therefore departed thence, and escaped to the cave Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. Verse 2, And every one that was in distress, and every one that was in debt, and every one that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. Verse 3, And David went thence to Mizpah of Moab, and he said unto the king of Moab, Let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth, and be with you, till I know what God will do for me. Verse 4, And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold. Verse 5, And the prophet Gad said unto David, Abide not in the hold, depart, and get thee into the land of Judah. Then David departed, and came into the forest of Horeb. Verse 6, When Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men that were with him, now Saul had put him to be under a tree in Ramah, having a spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Verse 7, Then Saul said unto his servants that stood about him, Hear now, ye Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands, and captains of hundreds? Verse 8, That all of you have conspired against me, and there is none that she with me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse, and there is none of you that is sorry for me, or she with unto me that my son hath stirred up my servant against me, to lie in wait, as if this day. Verse 9, Then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Neg, to Ahimelech the son of Ahud. Verse 10, And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Verse 11, Then the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahud, and all his father's house, the priests that were in Neb, and they came all of them to the king. Verse 12, And Saul said, Hear now, thou son of Ahud. And he answered, Here I am, my lord. Verse 13, And Saul said unto him, Why have ye conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse, in that thou hast given him bread, and a sword, and hast inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me, to lie in wait, as if this day? Verse 14, Then Ahimelech answered the king, and said, And who was so faithful among all thy servants as David, which is the king's son-in-law, and goeth at thy bidding, and is honorable in thine house? Verse 15, Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Be it far from me, let not the king impute anything unto his servant, nor to all the house of my father, for thy servant knew nothing of all this, less or more. Verse 16, And the king said, Thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, now, and all thy father's house. Verse 17, And the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, Turn, and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled, and did not shew it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. Verse 18, And the king said to Doeg, Turn now, and fall upon the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priests, and slew on that day fourscore persons that did wear linen Feb. Verse 19, And Neg, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and sucklings, and oxen, and asses, and sheep, with the edge of the sword. Verse 20, And one of the sons of Ahimelech the son of Ahud, named Abiathar, escaped, and fled after David. Verse 21, And Abiathar shewed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priests. Verse 22, And David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. Verse 23, Abide thou with me, fear not. For he that seek my life seek thy life, but with me thou shalt be in safeguard. First Book of Samuel chapter 23. Verse 1, Then they told David, saying, Behold, the Philistines fight against Keilah, and they rob the threshing floors. Verse 2, Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go and smite these Philistines? And the Lord said unto David, Go, and smite the Philistines, and save Keilah. Verse 3, And David's men said unto him, Behold, we be afraid here in Judah, how much more than if we come to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Verse 4, Then David inquired of the Lord yet again. And the Lord answered him and said, Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into thine hand. Verse 5, So David and his men went to Keilah, and fought with the Philistines, and brought away their cattle, and smote them with a great slaughter. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Verse 6, And it came to pass, when Abiathar the son of Ahimelech fled to David to Keilah, that he came down with a fed in his hand. Verse 7, And it was told Saul that David was come to Keilah. And Saul said, God hath delivered him into mine hand, for he is shouting by entering into a town that hath gates and bars. Verse 8, And Saul called all the people together to war, to go down to Keilah, to besiege David and his men. Verse 9, And David knew that Saul secretly practiced mischief against him, and he said to Abiathar the priest, Bring hither the fed. Verse 10, Then said David, O Lord God of Israel, thy servant hath certainly heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah, to destroy the city for Massacah. Verse 11, Will the men of Keilah deliver me up into his hand? Will Saul come down, as thy servant hath heard? O Lord God of Israel, I beseech thee, tell thy servant. And the Lord said, He will come down. Verse 12, Then said David, Will the men of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, They will deliver thee up. Verse 13, Then David and his men, which were about 600, arose and departed out of Keilah, and went whithersoever they could go. And it was told Saul that David was escaped from Keilah, and he feared to go forth. Verse 14, And David abode in the wilderness in strongholds, and remained in a mountain in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hand. Verse 15, And David saw that Saul was come out to seek his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a wood. Verse 16, And Jonathan Saul's son arose, and went to David into the wood, and strengthened his hand in God. Verse 17, And he said unto him, Fear not, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find thee, and thou shalt be king over Israel, and I shall be next unto thee, and that also Saul my father knoweth. Verse 18, And the two made a covenant before the Lord, and David abode in the wood, and Jonathan went to his house. Verse 19, Then came up the Ziphites to Saul to Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself with us in strongholds in the wood, in the hill of Hachilah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? Verse 20, Now therefore, O king, come down according to all the desire of thy soul to come down, and our part shall be to deliver him into the king's hand. Verse 21, And Saul said, Blessed be ye the Lord, for ye have compassion on me. Verse 22, Go, I pray you, prepare yet, and no one see his place where his haunt is, and who hath seen him there, for it is told me that he dealeth very subtly. Verse 23, See therefore, and take knowledge of all the lurking places where he hideth himself, and come ye again to me with a certainty, and I will go with you. And it shall come to pass, if he be in the land, that I will search him out throughout all the thousands of Judah. Verse 24, And they arose, and went to Ziph before Saul, but David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the plain on the south of Jeshimon. Verse 25, Saul also and his men went to seek him. And they told David, wherefore he came down into a rock, and abode in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard that, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. Verse 26, And Saul went on the side of the mountain, and David and his men on the side of the mountain. And David made haste to get away for fear of Saul, for Saul and his men compassed David and his men round about to take them. Verse 27, But there came a messenger unto Saul, saying, Haste thee, and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. Verse 28, Wherefore Saul returned from pursuing after David, and went against the Philistines. Therefore they called that place Selahanlakoth. Verse 29, And David went up from thence, and dwelt in strongholds at En-gedi. First Book of Samuel chapter 24. Verse 1, And it came to pass, when Saul was returned from following the Philistines, that it was told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Verse 2, Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. Verse 3, And he came to the she-goats by the way, where was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet, and David and his men remained in the sides of the cave. Verse 4, And the man of David said unto him, Behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, Behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayst do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose, and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily. Verse 5, And it came to pass afterward, that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt. Verse 6, And he said unto his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing unto my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch forth mine hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. Verse 7, So David stayed his servants with these words, and suffered them not to rise against Saul. But Saul rose up out of the cave, and went on his way. Verse 8, David also arose afterward, and went out of the cave, and cried after Saul, saying, My lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth, and bowed himself. Verse 9, And David said to Saul, Wherefore hearest thou men's words, saying, Behold, David seeketh thy herd? Verse 10, Behold, this day thine eyes have seen how that the Lord had delivered thee today into mine hand in the cave, and some bade me kill thee, but mine eye spared thee. And I said, I will not put forth mine hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Verse 11, Moreover, my father, see the skirt of thy robe on my hand. For in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe and killed thee not, know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand, and I have not sinned against thee, yet thou huntest my soul to take it. Verse 12, The Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me of thee, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. Verse 13, As said the proverb of the ancients, Wickedness proceedeth from the wicked, but mine hand shall not be upon thee. Verse 14, After whom is the king of Israel come out? After whom dost thou pursue? After a dead dog, after a flea. Verse 15, The Lord therefore be judge, and judge between me and thee, and see, and plead my cause, and deliver me out of thine hand. Verse 16, And it came to pass, when David had made an end of speaking these words unto Saul, that Saul said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice, and wept. Verse 17, And he said to David, Thou art more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded thee evil. Verse 18, And thou hast showed this day how that thou hast dealt well with me, because when the Lord had delivered me into thine hand, thou killedst me not. Verse 19, For if a man find his enemy, will he let him go well away? Wherefore the Lord reward thee good for that thou hast done unto me this day. Verse 20, And now, behold, I know well that thou shalt surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in thine hand. Verse 21, Swear now therefore unto me by the Lord, that thou wilt not cut off my seed after me, and that thou wilt not destroy my name out of my father's house. Verse 22, And David said word unto Saul. And Saul went home, but David and his men gathered them up into the hold. First Book of Samuel chapter 25. Verse 1, And Samuel died, and all the Israelites were gathered together, and lamented him, and buried him in his house at Ramah. And David arose, and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Verse 2, And there was a man in Meron, whose possessions were in Carmel, and the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep, and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Verse 3, Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding, and of a beautiful countenance. But the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. Verse 4, And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep. Verse 5, And David sent out 10 young men, and David said unto the young men, Get you up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. Verse 6, And thus shall ye say to him that liveth in prosperity, Peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. Verse 7, And now I have heard that thou hast shearers. Now thy shepherds which were with us, we heard them not, neither was there aught missing unto them, all the while they were in Carmel. Verse 8, Ask thy young men, and they will shew thee. Wherefore let the young men find favor in thine eyes. for we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh to thine hand unto thy servants, and to thy son David. Verse 9, And when David's young men came, they spake to Nabal according to all those words in the name of David, and ceased. Verse 10, And Nabal answered David's servants, and said, Who is David? And who was the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Verse 11, Shall I then take my bread, and my water, and my flesh that I have killed for my shares, and give it unto men, whom I know not whence they be? Verse 12, So David's young men turned away, and went again, and came and told him all those sayings. Verse 13, And David said unto his men, Gird ye on every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword, and David also girded on his sword, and there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by this stuff. Verse 14, But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master. And he railed on them. Verse 15, But the men were very good unto us, and we were not heard, neither missed we anything, as long as we were conversant with them, when we were in the fields. Verse 16, They were a wall unto us both by night and day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Verse 17, Now therefore no one consider what thou wilt do, for evil is determined against our master, and against all his household, for he is such a son of Belial, that a man cannot speak to him. Verse 18, Then Abigail made haste, and took 200 loaves, and 2 bottles of wine, and 5 sheep ready dressed, and 5 measures of parched corn, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses. Verse 19, And she said unto her servants, Go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. Verse 20, And it was so, as she rode on the ass, that she came down by the covert of the hill, and, behold, David and his men came down against her, and she met them. Verse 21, Now David had said, Surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow hath in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that pertained unto him, and he hath requited me evil for good. Verse 22, So and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave of all that pertained to him by the morning light any that pierceth against the wall. Verse 23, And when Abigail saw David, she hastened and lighted off the ass, and fell before David on her face, and bowed herself to the ground. Verse 24, And fell at his feet, and said, Upon me, my Lord, upon me let this iniquity be, and let thine hand, I pray thee, speak in thine audience, and hear the words of thine hand. Verse 25, Let not my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man of Belial, even Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I thine hand saw not the young men of my Lord, whom thou didst send. Verse 26, Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies, and they that seek evil to my Lord, be as Nabal. Verse 27, And now this blessing which thine hand hath brought unto my Lord, let it even be given unto the young men that follow my Lord. Verse 28, I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine hand, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord fighteth the battles of the Lord, and evil hath not been found in thee all thy days. Verse 29, Yet a man is risen to pursue thee, and to seek thy soul, but the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord thy God, and the souls of thine enemies, them shall he sling out, as out of the middle of a sling. Verse 30, And it shall come to pass, when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he hath spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel. Verse 31, That this shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. But when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, then remember thine hand. Verse 32, And David said to Abigail, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me. Verse 33, And blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou, which hast kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with mine own hand. Verse 34, For in very deed, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hadst hastened and come to meet me, surely there had not been left unto Nabal by the morning light any that pierceth against the wall. Verse 35, So David received of her hand that which she had brought him, and said unto her, Go up in peace to thine house. See, I have hearkened to thy voice, and have accepted thy person. Verse 36, And Abigail came to Nabal, and, behold, he held a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunken. Wherefore she told him nothing, less or more, until the morning light. Verse 37, But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. Verse 38, And it came to pass about 10 days after, that the Lord smote Nabal, that he died. Verse 39, And when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord, that hath pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and hath kept his servant from evil. For the Lord hath returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head. And David sent and cummoned with Abigail, to take her to him to wife. Verse 40, And when the servants of David would come to Abigail to Carmel, they spake unto her, saying, David sent us unto thee to take thee to him to wife. Verse 41, And she arose, and bowed herself on her face to the earth, and said, Behold, let thine hand be a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. Verse 42, And Abigail hastened and arose, and rode upon an ass, with 5 damsels of hers that went after her. And she went after the messengers of David, and became his wife. Verse 43, David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they were also both of them his wives. Verse 44, But Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Phelti the son of Laish, which was of Galim. First Book of Samuel chapter 26. Verse 1, And the Ziphites came unto Saul to Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon? Verse 2, Then Saul arose, and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him, to see David in the wilderness of Ziph. Verse 3, And Saul pitched in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon, by the way. But David abode in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. Verse 4, David therefore sent out spies, and understood that Saul was come in very deed. Verse 5, And David arose, and came to the place where Saul had pitched. And David beheld the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, the captain of his host. And Saul lay in the trench, and the people pitched round about him. Verse 6, Then answered David and said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah, brother to Jedid, saying, Who will go down with me to Saul to the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with thee. Verse 7, So David and Abishai came to the people by night. And, behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster. But Abner and the people lay round about him. Verse 8, Then said Abishai to David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thine hand this day. Now therefore let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him the second time. Verse 9, And David said to Abishai, Destroy him not. For who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed, and be guiltless? Verse 10, David said furthermore, As the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle, and perish. Verse 11, The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. But, I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster, and the cruse of water, and let us go. Verse 12, So David took the spear and the cruse of water from Saul's bolster, and they gathered them away, and no man saw it, nor knew it, neither awaked, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord was fallen upon them. Verse 13, Then David went over to the other side, and stood on the top of an hill afar off. a great space being between them. Verse 14, And David cried to the people, and to Abner the son of Ner, saying, Answerest thou not, Abner? Then Abner answered and said, Who art thou that criest to the king? Verse 15, And David said to Abner, Art not thou a valiant man? And who was like to thee in Israel? Wherefore then hast thou not kept thy lord the king? For there came one of the people in to destroy the king thy lord. Verse 16, This thing is not good that thou hast done. As the Lord liveth, ye are worthy to die, because ye have not kept your master, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the cruse of water that was at his bolster. Verse 17, And Saul knew David's voice, and said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And David said, It is my voice, my lord, O king. Verse 18, And he said, Wherefore doth my lord thus pursue after his servant? For what have I done? Or what evil is in mine hand? Verse 19, Now therefore, I pray thee, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord have stirred thee up against me, let him accept an offering. But if they be the children of men, cursed be they before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day from abiding in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, Go, serve other gods. Verse 20, Now therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth before the face of the Lord. For the king of Israel is come out to seek a flea, as when one doth hunt a partridge in the mountains. Verse 21, Then said Saul, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. Behold, I have played the fool, and severed exceedingly. Verse 22, And David answered and said, Behold the king's spear, and let one of the young men come over and fetch it. Verse 23, The Lord render to every man his righteousness in his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered thee into my hand today, but I would not stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. Verse 24, And, behold, as thy life was much said by this day in mine eyes, so let my life be much said by in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. Verse 25, Then Saul said to David, Blessed be thou, my son David. Thou shalt both do great things, and also shalt still prevail. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. First Book of Samuel chapter 27. Verse 1, And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines. And Saul shall despair of me, to see me any more in any coast of Israel. So shall I escape out of his hand. Verse 2, And David arose, and he passed over with the 600 men that were with him unto Achish, the son of Maok, king of Gath. Verse 3, And David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, every man with his household, even David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelites, and Abigail the Carmelites, Nabal's wife. Verse 4, And it was told Saul that David was fled to Gath, and he sought no more again for him. Verse 5, And David said unto Achish, If I have not found grace in thine eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country, that I may dwell there. For why should thy servant dwell in the royal city with thee? Verse 6, Then Achish gave him Ziklag the day. Wherefore Ziklag pertaineth unto the kings of Judah unto this day. Verse 7, And the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was a full year and 4 months. Verse 8, And David and his men went up, and invaded the Geshurites, and the Jezreelites, and the Amalekites. For those nations were of old the inhabitants of the land, as thou goest to Shur, even unto the land of Egypt. Verse 9, And David smote the land, and left neither man nor woman alive, and took away the sheep, and the oxen, and the asses, and the camels, and the apparel, and returned, and came to Achish. Verse 10, And Achish said, Whither have ye made a road today? And David said, Against the south of Judah, and against the south of the Jerahmeelites, and against the south of the Kenites. Verse 11, And David saved neither man nor woman alive, to bring tidings to Gath, saying, Lest they should tell on us, saying, So did David, and so will be his manner all the while he dwelt in the country of the Philistines. Verse 12, And Achish believed David, saying, He hath made his people Israel utterly to abhor him. Therefore he shall be my servant forever. First Book of Samuel chapter 28. Verse 1, And it came to pass in those days, that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare, to fight with Israel. And Achish said unto David, Know thou assuredly, that thou shalt go out with me to battle, thou and thy men. Verse 2, And David said to Achish, Surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do. And Achish said to David, Therefore will I make thee keeper of mine head forever. Verse 3, Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him, and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits, and the wizards, out of the land. Verse 4, And the Philistines gathered themselves together, and came and pitched in Shun. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. Verse 5, And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. Verse 6, And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams nor by Urim, nor by prophets. Verse 7, Then said Saul unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her, and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at the door. Verse 8, And Saul disguised himself, and put on other raiment, and he went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. Verse 9, And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he had cut off those that had familiar spirits, and the wizards, out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life, to cause me to die? Verse 10, And Saul swore to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Verse 11, Then said the woman, Whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, Bring me up Samuel. Verse 12, And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. Verse 13, And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. Verse 14, And he said unto her, What form is he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground, and bowed himself. Verse 15, And Samuel said to Saul, Why hast thou disquieted me, to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am sore distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and answered me no more, neither by prophets, nor by dreams. Therefore I have called thee, that thou mayst make known unto me what I shall do. Verse 16, Then said Samuel, Wherefore then dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from thee, and is become thine enemy? Verse 17, And the Lord hath done to him, as he spake by me. For the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand, and given it to thy neighbor, even to David. Verse 18, Because thou obeyedst not the voice of the Lord, nor executedst his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore had the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. Verse 19, Moreover the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow shall thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. Verse 20, Then Saul fell straightway all along on the earth, and was sore afraid, because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no bread all the day, nor all the night. Verse 21, And the woman came unto Saul, and saw that he was sore troubled, and said unto him, Behold, thine hand hath obeyed thy voice, and I have put my life in my hand, and have hearkened unto thy words which thou spakest unto me. Verse 22, Now therefore, I pray thee, hearken not also unto the voice of thine hand, and let me set a morsel of bread before thee, and eat, that thou mayst have strength, when thou goest on thy way. Verse 23, But he refused, and said, I will not eat. But his servants, together with the woman, compelled him, and he hearkened unto their voice. So he rose from the earth, and sat upon the bed. Verse 24, and the woman had a fat calf in the house, and she hastened and killed it, and took flour, and kneaded it, and did bake unleavened bread thereof. Verse 25, and she brought it before Saul, and before his servants, and they did eat. Then they rose up, and went away that night. First Book of Samuel chapter 29. Verse 1, now the Philistines gathered together all their armies to Aphek, and the Israelites pitched by a fountain which is in Jezreel. Verse 2, and the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds, and by thousands, but David and his men passed on in the rearward with Achish. Verse 3, then said the princes of the Philistines, what do these Hebrews here? And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, is not this David, the servant of Saul the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days, or these years, and I have found no fault in him since he fell unto me unto this day? Verse 4, and the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him. And the princes of the Philistines said unto him, make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place which thou hast appointed him, and let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us. For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Should it not be with the heads of these men? Verse 5, is not this David, of whom they sang one to another in dances, saying, Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Verse 6, then Achish called David, and said unto him, surely, as the Lord liveth, thou hast been upright, and the eye going out and the eye coming in with me in the host is good in my sight. For I have not found evil in thee since the day of the eye coming unto me unto this day. Nevertheless the Lord's favor thee not. Verse 7, wherefore now return, and go in peace, that thou displease not the lords of the Philistines. Verse 8, and David said unto Achish, but what have I done? And what hast thou found in thy servant so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I may not go fight against the enemies of my lord the king? Verse 9, and Achish answered and said to David, I know that thou art good in my sight, as an angel of God. Notwithstanding the princes of the Philistines have said, he shall not go up with us to the battle. Verse 10, wherefore now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come with thee, and as soon as ye be up early in the morning, and of light, depart. Verse 11, so David and his men rose up early to depart in the morning, to return into the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. First Book of Samuel chapter 30. Verse 1, and it came to pass, when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and Ziklag, and smitten Ziklag, and burned it with fire. Verse 2, and to taken the women captives, that were therein. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away, and went on their way. Verse 3, so David and his men came to the city, and, behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives, and their sons, and their daughters, were taken captives. Verse 4, then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept, until they had no more power to weep. Verse 5, and David's two wives were taken captives, Ahinoam the Jezreelites, and Abigail the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. Verse 6, and David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. Verse 7, and David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahinoam's son, I pray thee, bring me hither the fed. And Abiathar brought thither the fed to David. Verse 8, and David inquired at the Lord, saying, shall I pursue after this truth? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. Verse 9, so David went, he and the 600 men that were with him, and came to the brook Besor, where those that were left behind stayed. Verse 10, but David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 above behind, which was so faint that they could not go over the brook Besor. Verse 11, and they found an Egyptian in the field, and brought him to David, and gave him bread, and he did eat, and they made him drink water. Verse 12, and they gave him a piece of cake of figs, and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit came again to him, for he had eaten no bread, nor drunk any water, 3 days and 3 nights. Verse 13, And David said unto him, To whom belongest thou? And whence art thou? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite. And my master left me, because 3 days ago I fell sick. Verse 14, We made an invasion upon the south of the Crithites, and upon the coast which belongeth to Judah, and upon the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. Verse 15, And David said to him, Canst thou bring me down to this company? And he said, Swear unto me by God, that thou wilt neither kill me, nor deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will bring thee down to this company. Verse 16, And when he had brought him down, behold, they were spread abroad upon all the earth, eating and drinking, and dancing, because of all the great spoil that they had taken out of the land of the Philistines, and out of the land of Judah. Verse 17, And David smote them from the twilight even unto the evening of the next day, and there escaped not a man of them, save 400 young men, which rode upon camels, and fled. Verse 18, And David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his 2 wives. Verse 19, And there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil, nor anything that they had taken to them. David recovered all. Verse 20, And David took all the flocks and the herds, which they drove before those other cattle, and said, This is David's spoil. Verse 21, And David came to the 200 men, which were so faint that they could not follow David, whom they had made also to abide at the brook Besor, and they went forth to meet David, and to meet the people that were with him. And when David came near to the people, he saluted them. Verse 22, Then answered all the wicked men in Menablael, of those that went with David, and said, Because they went not with us, we will not give them out of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and his children, that they may let them away, and depart. Verse 23, Then said David, Ye shall not do so, my brethren, with that which the Lord hath given us, who hath preserved us, and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. Verse 24, For who will hearken unto you in this matter? But as his part is that goeth down to the battle, so shall his part be that tarrieth by the stuff. They shall part alike. Verse 25, And it was so from the day forward, that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. Verse 26, And when David came to Ziklag, he sent of the spoil unto the elders of Judah, even to his friends, saying, Behold a present, for you have the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. Verse 27, To them which were in Bethel, and to them which were in South Ramoth, and to them which were in Jetur. Verse 28, And to them which were in Aroer, and to them which were in Sodmoth, and to them which were in Shtmo. Verse 29, And to them which were in Rachel, and to them which were in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, and to them which were in the cities of the Kenites. Verse 30, And to them which were in Hormah, and to them which were in Kireshon, and to them which were in Ethich. Verse 31, And to them which were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were wont to haunt. First Book of Samuel chapter 31. Verse 1, Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines, and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. Verse 2, And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan, and Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. Verse 3, And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Verse 4, Then said Saul unto his armor-bearer, Draw thy sword, and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through, and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took his sword, and fell upon it. Verse 5, And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword, and died with him. Verse 6, So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men, that same day together. Verse 7, And when the men of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, and they that were on the other side Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities, and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. Verse 8, And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. Verse 9, And they cut off his head, and stripped off his armor, and sent it to the land of the Philistines round about, to publish it in the house of their idols, and among the people. Verse 10, And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. Verse 11, And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul. Verse 12, All the valiant men arose, and went all night, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and came to Jabesh, and burnt them there. Verse 13, And they took their bones, and buried them under a tree of Jabesh, and fasted 7 days.